TM, Transcendental Meditation for post-traumatic stress, and why particularly TM, aside from my bias. Hopefully I have some data to support that. There are a number of different meditative techniques. As far as I know, this is not one of them. Let's move on to, let me digress for just a moment and talk about Mama Tiger here. So the story may be apocryphal, but apparently this tiger, she had a couple of cubs that did not survive. And she became depressed. She wasn't eating, and the zookeeper thought that she would die. So they had the brilliant idea of taking these suckling pigs and wrapping them up in tiger outfits and putting them in the enclosure with her. What could go wrong? They figured either she would adopt them and rekindle her maternal feelings. Worst case scenario was she got her appetite back. So we'll come back to Mama Tiger in just a couple of minutes. So again, there are lots of different meditative techniques. They can be lumped and split in various ways. One that has been published back in 2010, there we go. Lumped three broad categories: focused attention, open monitoring, and automatic self-transcending. And these different techniques, different categories of techniques can be differentiated one from the other, electroencephalography, also through functional MRI and PET scanning. So the purpose of all this is not to appreciate why part of your brain turns orange and another part turns blue, but just to recognize that different meditative techniques do different things. They are different one from the other. So the question is, so what? Do those differences are they significant? Do we need to recognize those in order to make decisions about them? And for instance, we can see here that even though these little piglets are never going to chase down a gazelle, of course, neither is Mama Tiger since she's in a zoo, but these piglets will never be tigers, but they're close enough for government work as far as Mama Tiger is concerned. So they fit the bill, even though clearly they're not tigers. But you could envision a scenario where when something is not the same as something else and you're looking for a particular outcome, that it may be that the outcome you're looking for, even though it seemed like you were headed in the right direction, you're not going to get what you want. So the purpose of that is just to recognize again that different meditative techniques are different. And the one that we have fallen upon for our talk this evening is TM. It's been around since antiquity, but it was introduced to the West in the late 1950s by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. It entered its pop phase in the 60s with the Beatles and Mia Farrow and so forth, if you're old enough to remember them. And then it went into its scientific phase starting in about 1970, and there it has remained. So there have been many millions of dollars spent, over 400 peer-reviewed studies, and I'm blessedly not going to go into many of them tonight. For those of you who are completely unacquainted with it, let me just mention that it is a mental technique, 20 minutes twice a day. The results are prompt. It's easy to learn, effortless to perform. It's not a religion. It's not a philosophy. It's compatible with any. And it doesn't require any change in belief or lifestyle, with the exception that it does require you to actually practice the technique in order to get the results. So with that exception, no other changes in lifestyle are required. So it has the effect of busting stress. So we see here it has beneficial effects with regard to anxiety, in the reduction of high blood pressure. This statement from the American Heart Association indicated that TM could be considered in clinical practice to lower blood pressure, but all other meditative techniques, they said, were not recommended in clinical practice to lower blood pressure at this time. That may change, but at the time they wrote this in 2013, and they have not updated that since. So that's the current recommendation. There is one study that I do want to mention, not because it's so relevant necessarily to our topic, except that it points out a significant distinction with regard to the research on TM. Most of the research, even though it uses standardized tools and is published in peer-reviewed journals and so forth, it's still, the tools measure a subjective experience. They measure people's self-reported sleep, with the exception of the basic science studies that look at physiology and hormones and blood pressure and things like that. When it's measuring, or rather studying how people feel, you have to ask them how they feel, whether with regard to their anxiety, their sleep, their relationships, and so forth. This study, by contrast, looked at persons with coronary artery disease and randomized them to TM versus a control group, which controlled for attention and time and so forth. And their endpoints were not, how you're feeling, how you're sleeping, whether you're stressed or not. Their endpoints, the endpoint was a composite index of heart attack, stroke, and death. So certainly you're going to feel bad if you had a heart attack or a stroke, but the point is that this is not a fuzzy endpoint depending on how you feel at all. Their index was not how you feel about having a heart attack, it was whether or not you had a heart attack or a stroke or you died. And as you can see, the result there, 48% fewer events over a little less than 5.5 years. And that was intent to treat data, which just means that that was all comers. If you were randomized to the TM group and then decided that you didn't want to do it at all, or you did it for a week and they decided to quit, your data ended up in the TM group. The 62% is for completers, those who actually learned TM and continued to practice it. They had a 62% reduction in this index. So my point there is just that it is not only doing something to your mind and soul, or however you want to look at it, and your psyche, and it's causing improved psychological outcomes, but it's doing something very profound to the physiology as well.